Story number 1.
I worked the night shift at a 24-hour gas station off Route 17 in New Jersey. It wasn't the kind of place that got a lot of attention. Just a rundown station with two pumps, flickering fluorescent lights, and a little convenience store attached. We were technically part of a chain, but the owners barely maintained it. The cameras were always laggy, the back door didn't lock properly, and sometimes, depending on the weather, the ceiling in the storage room leaked. I was 24 and in between things. My last job had ended badly, and I wasn't ready to go back to school. I figured working overnight, where things were usually dead quiet, would give me space to think. My shifts ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and I was almost always alone unless the manager stopped by, which he rarely did. The first few weeks were uneventful. A few truckers here and there, high school kids sneaking beer they couldn't legally buy, and the occasional late-night drifter looking to use the bathroom or grab a smoke. I brought books and podcasts to pass the time. Sometimes I'd stand behind the counter and just watch the road outside, empty and still, a ribbon of silence stretching through the trees. It was around mid-November when I started noticing something strange. It started with the lights. Around 2 a.m., like clockwork, the overhead lights inside the store would flicker. Not all at once, just one row at the back near the coolers. Then the motion sensor for the back storage room would trip, even though I hadn't gone near it. At first, I figured it was a rat or some faulty wiring. I told my manager, Ray, "But this place is old," he said. "Half the systems are crap. Don't worry about it." The next night, I made sure to walk into the storage room when the sensor tripped. I expected to see maybe a raccoon or a loose shelf, but the room was empty. Still, the sensor light kept clicking on and off by itself every 15 minutes, as if someone kept walking past it. One night, around 2:30 a.m., I was restocking the shelves when I heard a knock at the glass. I turned and saw someone standing just outside the front door. He wore a gray hoodie, hood pulled low, jeans that were soaked at the ankles, and old boots. His face was in shadow, but what stood out was how still he was. Just standing there, not moving, not even shifting his weight. I walked around the counter, ready to unlock the door, but something made me pause. I looked at the clock, 2:33 a.m. I glanced back. He was gone, not walked away, just not there anymore. No footsteps, no sound of movement. I stepped outside and looked around. The lot was empty. No cars, just darkness. I told myself he probably ducked around the side or into the woods, but something about how quickly he vanished stuck with me. The next night, I came in a little early. Ray was just finishing his shift and handed me the keys. "Don't let the ghosts get you," he joked. I raised an eyebrow. "What?" He laughed. "Old joke. People say this place is haunted. Some guy died here years ago, got hit by a truck out front. Customers used to leave candles on the curb." I asked him if that was true, and he shrugged. "Maybe. I've heard stories. Don't let it get in your head." He left, and I locked the door behind him. Around 2:15 a.m., the power went out. No warning. No flicker, just darkness. The emergency lights kicked on a second later, dim, red, casting long shadows through the aisles. I grabbed my flashlight and checked the fuse box in the back. Nothing was tripped. Everything looked normal. I stepped into the cooler room and froze. On the inside of the glass cooler door, someone had written a word in the condensation. "Stay." I turned fast, shining the light around. No one. My breath caught. I wiped the word away and backed out slowly. The power came back on 10 minutes later, all by itself. I didn't tell Ray this time. I wasn't sure he'd believe me. Hell, I wasn't sure I believed me. A few nights later, something woke me while I was napping in the office chair around 3:20 a.m. It was the sound of the bathroom door closing. I sat up straight, confused. I hadn't heard anyone come in. I checked the monitor. The feed was glitching, but I could make out a tall figure standing just outside the bathroom. I stood slowly and walked out from behind the counter. The front door was still locked. No sign of forced entry. The bathroom door was shut. I reached for the handle. It was cold, ice cold. I opened the door fast. The bathroom was empty, but the mirror above the sink was fogged, like someone had just taken a hot shower. And written across it was a question. "Why did you come back?" I stood frozen, the flashlight trembling in my hand. "I never left," I whispered, though I didn't know why. I slammed the door shut and spent the rest of the shift sitting behind the counter, all the lights on, one hand gripping a wrench I kept behind the register for emergencies. After that night, the dreams started. Every time I slept during the day, I'd see the same gas station, but it was darker. Empty shelves, broken glass, the pumps rusted, I'd be inside, and I'd hear someone whispering from the cooler room. I'd walk over, open the door, and find myself staring into pitch black. Then a face would emerge, sunken eyes, gray skin, mouth stretched open like it was screaming silently, and I'd wake up. The dreams always ended the same way. I started drinking coffee by the gallon just to avoid sleeping. I asked Ray again about the guy who died. He finally gave in. It was back in 1996, a man named Donnie, local guy, used to hang around here. One night, he was trying to cross the road to get to the diner, got hit by a semi. They said he'd been standing in the middle of the road, just staring at the station. I asked if he was drunk. Ray shook his head. Don't think so. Some say he'd been hearing voices, talking to someone that wasn't there. I looked outside at the exact spot Ray pointed. There was a patch on the curb where the pavement looked slightly darker. I hadn't noticed it before, but now I couldn't unsee it. I started bringing a cross with me, kept it in my pocket, not because I was religious, but because I needed something. Anything. The final straw came a week before Christmas. I just finished mopping the floor near the coffee machine when the lights dimmed. The store went quiet, no hum from the fridge, no buzz from the lights. I looked up. Every screen, register, security feed, lottery display, was showing the same image. A figure standing just outside the front door, face pressed against the glass, blood smeared across the glass like he'd been clawing to get in. Then everything went black. I screamed. I don't remember doing it, but my throat hurt after. When the lights came back on, I ran outside. No one there. But the glass door had 5 long smears down it, red and wet, like handprints. I quit that morning. Ray called me 5 times, but I never answered. I didn't even pick up my last check. I drove past the station a few weeks later and saw a new guy behind the counter. He looked young, tired, alone. I wanted to warn him, but I didn't. A few months later, I saw a news article online. The gas station had closed after a fire broke out in the back room. No injuries, but they never reopened. Official cause, electrical. The photo with the article showed the place boarded up. And in the window, behind the soot-streaked glass, I swear I saw someone standing there. Hood up. Face in shadow, watching, story the end.
Story number 2.
I used to work security at a large regional hospital in southern Indiana. Not one of those sparkling modern mega complexes. This one was old, built in the 1940s, expanded half a dozen times, and stitched together with mismatched hallways and weird dead ends. There were 3 main towers, each added in a different decade, and underneath the whole thing ran a network of tunnels that hadn't been used regularly in years. Most of them were blocked off or repurposed for storage. Every now and then we'd get called to check on something down there. I worked nights, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. 5 days a week. The pay was decent, the work was mostly quiet, and I liked the solitude. But it didn't stay quiet. Not for long. My partner's name was Randy. Older guy, been there longer than anyone else on the security team. Didn't talk much, but when he did, it was always something interesting. He used to joke that the hospital had too much death under one roof, and he wasn't wrong. There were 2 separate morgues, one for pathology and one for the county coroner. The west wing of Tower A had once been a psychiatric unit that shut down in the 1980s. The basement of Tower C still had lead-lined rooms from when they treated tuberculosis back in the day. The first weird thing I noticed was the elevator in Tower B. Every couple of nights it would go to the basement level, level 0, at exactly 3:17 a.m. No one called it. No one got on. It would just descend by itself, sit there for about 30 seconds, then return to the ground floor. I thought maybe it was a mechanical issue or a glitch in the system. Randy said he'd been doing that for years. Basement's got a bad vibe, he told me once. Even when it's empty, it don't feel empty. One night, I got called down to the laundry tunnel. That's what we called the long, narrow stretch of underground passageway between the laundry building and the main hospital. They used to run big carts of sheets and gowns through it, but now it was just pipes and echo and darkness. The janitorial team swore they heard a loud banging noise. like someone slamming the steel access door at the far end. I took my flashlight and headed down. The whole tunnel smelled like bleach and mildew. My boots echoed with every step. The walls were concrete, lined with fat, rusting pipes and flickering lights spaced too far apart. I was halfway down when I heard it. 3 hard bangs, slow and deliberate. Bang, bang, bang. I froze. It wasn't coming from ahead of me, but behind, back toward the hospital. But no one had been down there when I entered, and I would have seen anyone pass me. I turned around slowly, flashlight trembling in my grip, and called out. No answer. Then the lights started going out, not all at once, but one by one, coming toward me. First the one over the entrance, then the next, then the next. A chain of dying bulbs marching toward where I stood. I ran. I didn't think. I just turned and sprinted to the exit at the far end, slammed the steel access door open, and burst out into the night air behind the laundry building. My lungs burned, and for a minute I just stood there, hands on my knees, sucking in cold air and telling myself it was just a power surge. But the lights weren't out when I returned with Randy 10 minutes later. Everything was back to normal. No flickering, no burnt bulbs, nothing. I told you, he said. It don't feel empty down there. I didn't go in that tunnel alone again. A few weeks later, Randy got reassigned to work nights in the emergency department, so I was paired with a new guy named Tyler. Fresh out of the army, young, cocky, not one to believe in ghost stories. I didn't tell him much. I figured he'd see it himself soon enough. And he did. We were patrolling Tower A, top to bottom, when Tyler decided to check the disused psych wing on the 5th floor. That part had been sealed off years ago after a fire damaged the east corridor. But there was a master key, and Tyler was curious. I stayed by the stairwell while he went in. He was gone less than 5 minutes. When he came back, he looked like he'd seen something that didn't belong in this world. His skin was pale, and his hands were shaking. "There's someone in there," he said. I asked him to explain, but he just kept repeating it. "There's someone in there." We went back in together. There was no one in the wing. The air was stale, thick with dust. Paint peeled from the walls in strips like old skin. Most of the doors were chained shut. But Tyler led me to room 516. The door was open. Inside was a bed frame, a broken light fixture, and deep scratches in the tile floor. Scratches that looked like they'd been made by fingernails, long and uneven, gouged into the white surface. He pointed to the corner of the room. She was standing there, he whispered, pale, in a hospital gown. Her mouth was wide open like she was screaming, but there was no sound, and her eyes were black. We filed an incident report, but no one followed up. The admin team didn't care about ghost sightings. They just wanted quiet, especially from night staff. That night, Tyler quit. Said he couldn't sleep anymore. Said he kept waking up at 3:17 a.m. every night, the same time that elevator went to the basement. After Tyler left, I worked solo for a few weeks until they hired someone new. During that time, I stopped going into Tower A after midnight unless I absolutely had to. Something about that floor, especially near the old psych wing, felt off, like the air didn't move right, like it had weight. One night in early November, I was sitting in the security office, watching the monitors, when I noticed movement in the west stairwell of Tower C. That stairwell had been sealed off for maintenance after an elevator upgrade, so no one should have been in there. But on the black and white feed, I saw a figure slowly descending the stairs. She was barefoot, wearing a patient gown, head tilted to the side like her neck was broken. I switched to another camera, trying to get a better angle, but she never appeared on any of the others. Just that one feed. I grabbed my flashlight and headed that way. When I reached the stairwell, the air felt different, still and wrong, like I'd stepped into a different atmosphere. My breath caught in my throat as I opened the stairwell door. Nothing. Dust on the stairs. No footprints. No sign of anyone. But as I turned to leave, I heard a whisper behind me. Just one word. Stay. I ran. I didn't even close the door. Just ran all the way back to the office and locked myself in. The next night, I brought it up to Randy. He didn't look surprised. Just tired. "You seen her too," he said. "She's not the only one." He told me stories about an orderly who hanged himself in the second-floor supply closet in 1978 and is sometimes seen walking the halls, about a little boy in a striped shirt who appears in the radiology department asking for his mother, about a woman in black who cries in the chapel at night but vanishes when you get too close. Place is full of them, he said, too much pain soaked into the walls. By December, I was seeing things too often to pretend otherwise. Shadows where there shouldn't be any, lights turning on in locked rooms, whispers in the stairwells, alarms going off for no reason, especially around 3 a.m. Always 3 a.m. The worst was the incident in the morgue. I got a call about a motion detector going off in the pathology freezer. Those rooms are sealed and cold with motion sensors to ensure no unauthorized access. I met the pathology tech at the door and we went in together. The lights flickered. Every drawer was closed, except one. The third one from the bottom. It was open about 3 inches, just enough to see inside. The toe of a foot stuck out, pale with a tag. The tech checked the log. "We don't have anyone in that drawer," he said. He reached for it. I told him not to, but he did anyway. Inside was a body bag. Empty. Nothing inside. But there was frost on the walls like a figure had been lying there for hours. We shut it. Logged it. Told no one. By the time I left that job the following spring, I had a collection of stories, enough to fill a book. I never told them all. Some of them were too strange. Some still give me chills when I think about them. But the worst thing I ever saw, something I never reported, happened on my last night. It was quiet. Too quiet. No alarms, no calls, no disturbances. Just stillness. I was walking the hallway outside the operating suites when I heard a gurney rolling behind me. I turned. Nothing. I kept walking. Then I heard it again. Squeaky wheels and the rattle of loose metal. I turned the corner and saw it. An empty gurney rolling down the hall by itself. Moving slowly, steadily, no one pushing it. And on the security feed later, I watched as it moved past 3 cameras. Alone. Silent. Except on the last one. Just as it turned out of frame, I saw a hand reach up from underneath. Story the end.
Story number 3.
I worked the night shift at a small hospital in a quiet town in Michigan. The hospital wasn't big, but it had been around since the 1950s. A lot of the building had been renovated over the years, but there were still old sections that had this lingering smell of antiseptic and stale air. It was mostly quiet during the nights with only a few patients in the ICU, a couple in the ER, and the occasional emergency that would pop up. But the nights were always longer than they seemed. I was a nurse working 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. I'd been working there for about a year, and at first I thought the night shift would be easy. No doctors hovering over you, no family members asking a million questions. It was peaceful. But that peace was often disrupted by strange things that happened after midnight. The first time I noticed something odd was around 2 a.m. I had just finished my rounds in the ICU and was heading toward the nurses' station when I felt a strange chill in the air. It wasn't cold, but the kind of cold that you feel in your bones, like someone had opened a door to the outside world and let the night air in. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe the HVAC system was acting up. I sat at the desk, updating patient charts, when I heard a sound from down the hall. It was soft at first. Just a faint tapping noise. It was coming from the old wing of the hospital, the part that was built in the 1950s, which had been left mostly unused for years. I'd worked there long enough to know that it was just a storage area now, filled with old equipment and forgotten files. But the sound was persistent, a rhythmic tapping, like someone was tapping their fingers against the wall. It was faint, but it was there. I stood up from my desk and walked toward the hallway. Curious. The hallway was dim, with only a few flickering lights. I hesitated for a moment, my mind racing with thoughts of why there would be anyone in that section of the hospital at this hour. The tapping stopped as I approached the old wing. I glanced around, but there was no one in sight. I slowly walked down the hall, checking rooms along the way. Everything was locked. The silence felt suffocating, and the farther I went, the colder it became. I reached the end of the hall, where the old storage rooms were. As I turned the corner, I felt a cold draft blow through me, and for a second I thought I saw something, just a glimpse out of the corner of my eye. A figure, standing still in one of the rooms. I froze, heart pounding. I took a slow step forward, but the figure was gone. I quickly checked the room. Empty. I felt ridiculous, but a sense of unease lingered in my chest. I decided to head back to the nurses' station. As I turned to leave, I heard a sound again, this time clearer, more distinct. a soft voice, almost like a whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but it was definitely there. I bolted back to the station, and as I walked briskly, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following me. When I returned to the station, I told myself it was just my imagination, maybe the stress from a long shift getting to me. But it was hard to shake the strange feeling that something was off in that part of the hospital. A few nights later, things got worse. It was around 3:30 a.m. The hospital was quiet, the only sounds coming from the distant hum of the air conditioning and the occasional beep from the ICU monitors. I was sitting at the nurse's station, flipping through some paperwork when I heard something that made my blood run cold. A loud crash coming from down the hall. It was followed by the unmistakable sound of a door slamming open. I stood up immediately, my heart pounding. My first thought was that it was a patient in distress. Maybe someone had fallen or tried to get out of bed. But when I rushed toward the sound, I found nothing. The hallway was empty. The door to one of the patient rooms had been flung open, but the room was dark and the bed was empty. I checked the chart for that room. Mrs. Whitaker, she had been in a deep coma for over a week. No movement, no sign of life. I called out to the room, but no answer came. I walked inside, my flashlight scanning the darkness. The room was cold, colder than it should have been. I shone my light over the bed, the IV pole, the machines that monitored her vitals. Everything seemed in place except for the door. The door had been torn from its hinges. That's when I saw something. A faint, shadowy figure standing at the foot of the bed. It was almost like smoke, but darker, shifting, moving. I felt my breath catch in my throat, and for a moment, I couldn't move. I was frozen, staring at it. It wasn't a person, but it looked human. Or at least, it had a shape that resembled one, but it wasn't right. Its form was shifting, like it was made from the shadows themselves. I snapped out of my stupor and bolted out of the room, heart racing. I didn't even check to see if the figure was still there. I just ran back to the nurse's station and locked the door behind me. I called the hospital supervisor and told her about the door and the figure, but she just dismissed it as an equipment malfunction or an electrical issue. I stayed in the station for the rest of the night, not daring to leave. When the morning shift arrived, I left without saying much to anyone. But I knew something wasn't right. Over the next few weeks, things only got worse. I started hearing things, footsteps behind me when I was alone in the halls, voices whispering when no one was around. Sometimes I'd feel a hand on my shoulder when I was standing still, but when I turned around, no one would be there. I started seeing things too, shadows in the corners of my vision, figures standing just out of reach, then disappearing when I looked directly at them. One night I saw a woman in a hospital gown standing at the end of the hallway. She was staring at me, her face pale, her eyes wide. When I blinked, she was gone. I had no idea what was happening. Was it exhaustion? The stress of the job? But the more it happened, the more I couldn't deny that something was wrong with that place. Then came the final straw. It was around 4 a.m. one morning. I had just finished checking on a few patients in the ICU when I heard it again. That tapping sound. The same rhythmic tapping I had heard weeks ago in the old wing. I followed the sound, feeling a chill in the air as I moved deeper into the hospital. I knew exactly where it was coming from this time. The old psychiatric wing. I had heard rumors that the wing had been closed off after an incident years ago, but I never paid them much attention. The door to the wing was usually locked, but tonight it was ajar. I hesitated, but something pushed me forward. I stepped inside and the temperature dropped immediately. The air felt dense, oppressive. I walked through the darkened halls, listening to the soft tapping sound growing louder. The hallway opened into a large common room, filled with old chairs and furniture covered in dusty sheets. The tapping was louder now, almost deafening. I turned to my left, and that's when I saw it, a figure, hunched over, sitting in one of the old chairs. It was a man, or at least I think it was. His face was obscured by long matted hair, and his body was thin and gaunt. He was rocking back and forth, tapping his fingers against the arm of the chair. His eyes, wide and unblinking, locked onto mine. I felt my stomach lurch, a wave of nausea hitting me. I tried to speak, but no words came out. My body felt paralyzed, like I was rooted to the spot. Then the figure stood up, his movements jerky and unnatural, and he started toward me. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I couldn't do anything but watch as he shuffled closer, his face still hidden in the shadows. He raised a hand, long, bony fingers reaching toward me, and I finally broke free from my paralysis. I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for air in the cold morning. The next day, I handed in my resignation. I couldn't go back there. I couldn't stay in a place where I knew something was wrong, something that I couldn't explain. I don't know what I saw that night. I don't know what that figure was, but I know it wasn't human, and I know I'm not going back. Story the end.
Story number 4.
I had been working the night shift at a small, independent 24-hour convenience store for almost a year. It was located at the edge of town on a dark, empty road that stretched for miles in either direction. The place was barely visible from the highway unless you were right up on it, so most of the time, the traffic was sparse. I had gotten used to the stillness of the graveyard hours, the only sound being the hum of the freezers in the back and the faint sound of cars speeding by outside. The hours themselves weren't too bad either. From 11 p.m. until 7 a.m., I was left alone in the store, save for the occasional customer. And while it was often lonely, it gave me time to think and pass the hours with podcasts or reading. Most nights, the store would go quiet for hours on end, with only a few late-night stragglers coming in for gas or snacks. But, as with all night shifts, there were moments when the stillness seemed almost unnatural. It wasn't long before I began to feel a sense of unease. It wasn't anything that I could directly point to, no strange noises or cold spots, just a growing sense of being watched, a creeping sensation that the longer I spent in that store, the more I felt as though something else was present. The first incident occurred about 2 months after I started. I was organizing the shelves near the front when I noticed, out of the corner of my eye, a figure standing near the entrance. I looked up quickly, expecting a customer, but there was no one there. Just the empty parking lot, bathed in the dim light from the single street lamp outside. I shrugged it off. Sometimes the dark could play tricks on you, especially when you're tired and your mind starts to wander. But the feeling lingered. The sensation of being watched, as though there were someone just outside the door, or even behind me, waiting for me to turn around. At first it was subtle. The flickering of the overhead lights every now and then, a cold draft that would sweep through the aisles even when all the windows were closed. The sound of footsteps behind me, soft and measured, but when I turned around, there was never anyone there. Then it escalated. One night, a few weeks after that first encounter, I was alone behind the counter when I heard the unmistakable sound of a door opening. I looked up, expecting to see the bell above the door ringing, indicating that a customer had entered, but nothing. The door remained shut. I was puzzled, unsure of what I had just heard. I stood up and walked over to the entrance to double-check, but the door was still locked. That was when I felt it. A cold rush of air hit my back, sending a shiver down my spine. My skin prickled. I turned slowly, expecting to see someone standing behind me, but again, there was nothing. It felt as though the air had thickened, pressing against me, the room suddenly smaller. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the unease. I checked the time. It was almost 3 a.m. Maybe I was just tired. But I wasn't tired enough to ignore the feeling that something was in the store with me, something that didn't belong. The nights that followed were filled with more strange occurrences. One night, while I was restocking the shelves, I heard a low, guttural whisper. It was so soft, so faint, that I could barely make it out. I froze in place, my heart racing, trying to listen. But there was nothing else. No footsteps, no sounds of movement. Just the faint rustling of the wind outside. I chalked it up to my overactive imagination, but the whispers continued every night. Sometimes they were too faint to hear, but other times they were sharp and clear, always just at the edge of my hearing. There was no obvious source, nothing that made sense. I would hear them when I was alone in the back or when I walked past the storage room, where I would feel a strange pressure in the air, like something was just beyond the door, watching me. I remember the first time I actually saw something. It was late one night, past 4 a.m. The store was empty, as usual. I was behind the counter, reading a book, when I saw a shadow move across the floor in front of the door. At first, I thought it was just the shadow of a car passing by outside, but it didn't look right. The movement was too slow, too deliberate. I glanced up, half expecting to see a customer enter, but there was no one there. The parking lot was empty, the only light coming from the single street lamp and the glow from the store's neon sign. I shook my head, telling myself it was just a trick of the light. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had moved inside the store. The strange occurrences became more frequent after that. The whispers grew louder, clearer. I could make out fragments of sentences, sometimes just my name, other times a strange language I couldn't understand. The flickering lights became a regular occurrence, and the temperature would drop in specific areas of the store, particularly near the back. The walk-in freezer became unbearable to stand in after a while, as if the cold was unnatural. It wasn't a typical freezer chill, but something that gnawed at my bones, something I couldn't escape. One particularly disturbing night, a regular came in around 2:30 a.m. He was a heavy-set man who worked late shifts at a factory nearby. He came in every few nights for cigarettes and coffee. I had known him for months, and he was always friendly, though he had a somewhat reserved demeanor. He walked up to the counter, his usual items in hand, when he suddenly stopped, looking past me. I followed his gaze, but there was nothing there. "What is it?" I asked, a little nervous. He didn't respond immediately. He just stood there, staring toward the back of the store, near the aisle of chips and snacks. I could feel my heart racing, my palms suddenly sweating. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "Did you hear that?" he finally asked, his voice low. I looked around, my throat tight. "Hear what?" He shook his head slowly. I could have sworn I heard someone whispering my name. Thought it was you at first, but it didn't sound like you. It sounded like someone else. I froze. It was happening to him too. The man paid for his items quickly and left without another word, but the sense of dread in the air lingered long after he was gone. I had no idea what was going on, but I knew that I wasn't imagining it. The store, for some reason, seemed to have become a magnet for something that didn't belong. Then one night, it happened. I was working my usual shift when I heard the sound of the back door opening. This time, it was unmistakable. There was no mistaking the loud metallic creak of the door being pushed open, followed by the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. I could see the light from the back room spilling into the store, but there was no one there. I moved slowly toward the door to the back, but as I approached, the footsteps stopped. The door was wide open, but the room was empty. The temperature in the room had dropped significantly, and I could see my breath in the air. I reached out and felt the door frame, but the metal was ice cold. It was as if someone had been standing there watching me and had just disappeared. I backed away slowly, my breath shallow. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't explain it. It felt like something was playing with me, pushing me to the edge of my sanity. That night, I made the decision to leave. I couldn't take it anymore. The strange noises, the whispers, the cold spots. It was all too much. I locked the door behind me, turned off the lights, and left the store in the dark. I never went back. The next morning, I found out that the store had been closed indefinitely. The owners had put it up for sale. It was strange to me because the store had always been profitable and nothing had seemed wrong on the surface. But after everything I had experienced, I knew that something was wrong with that place, something that wasn't ready to let go. I sometimes wonder what it was that haunted that convenience store. Was it the land itself, something tied to the building, or was it something that had been waiting for me all along? I don't know, but I know this much. I'll never forget the feeling of being watched, the chill that crept into my bones every time I stepped inside. Story, the end.
Story number 5.
The night shift at the old hospital wasn't something I had ever imagined I'd end up doing. I had just moved to town, barely settled in, and needed a job. I had worked as a janitor in a few different places before, but nothing like this. St. Agatha's was an old building, over 100 years old, with narrow hallways, squeaky floors, and long stretches of rooms that were mostly unused by the day staff. The night shift was quieter, but it had a different kind of eerie to it. It wasn't just the dim lights or the occasional flickering that made it unsettling. It was the fact that something felt off. The hospital was situated on the outskirts of town, away from the bustle of the city. The town itself was small, quiet, almost too quiet. People often talked about the history of the place, but most of the stories had been buried with time. The hospital had seen its fair share of tragedies over the years, and a few of the nurses and doctors had even admitted to hearing strange things while working late. I'd heard the rumors too, but I didn't think much of them. I was just here to do my job and leave. The first night I started working there, everything seemed normal. I was given the standard tour and introduced to the other staff, mostly the night nurses and a few security guards. The building had several wings, but the one that was most unsettling to me was the oldest section, the East Wing. The hospital had been expanded over the years, but the East Wing had never been fully renovated. It had an old, decrepit feel to it. The smell of disinfectant and age mixed in the air, and the floors creaked under my feet. "Don't go in there too much," one of the nurses, Rachel, told me with a wink as she showed me to my station. "It's a bit of a ghost story." I laughed it off, thinking she was joking. But as the night went on, I started to feel the unease creeping in. There was an oppressive quiet that hung in the air, and as I cleaned the hallways, I found myself glancing over my shoulder, as if I could feel someone or something watching me. The first incident that really shook me happened around 2 a.m. I had finished cleaning a set of rooms on the fourth floor and was heading back toward the supply closet when I heard a voice. It was a soft whisper, barely audible, but I could swear it was calling my name. "Kevin?" I stopped dead in my tracks. My heart raced in my chest, and my mind immediately tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone was on the phone, or perhaps it was the wind. But I was standing in the middle of a long, quiet hallway with no doors open. I called out, "Hello?" No answer. I was about to dismiss it when I heard it again, this time clearer. "Kevin, help me." I spun around, searching the hallway for any signs of movement. But it was empty. The long stretch of hallway was vacant, and the only sound was the soft hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. I started walking again, my steps quickening, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The next night, the same thing happened. I was cleaning the East Wing, an area that hadn't been touched in a long time, when I heard the whisper. This time it was much louder, almost as if it was standing right next to me. "Help me." I froze, my blood running cold. There was no one there. I stepped back, my hand instinctively reaching for the phone in my pocket. I didn't know who to call, but I felt like I needed to do something. I turned around and rushed down the hallway, but the feeling of being followed was overwhelming. It was as if someone was just behind me, their breath on my neck. I started avoiding the East Wing after that. I stuck to the quieter parts of the hospital and worked as quickly as possible. But no matter where I went, there was always that lingering feeling that something was watching me, waiting for me to turn around. A few weeks into my shift, something happened that I couldn't explain. I was cleaning the third floor, which was much newer than the East Wing and much more modern in its design. But it was still quiet, still strange at night. I was in one of the patient rooms when I heard a door slam shut behind me. I turned, expecting to see someone standing there, but again, there was no one. I walked into the hallway and checked both ends. No movement, just silence. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I walked back to the room and made sure everything was locked. I wasn't sure what had caused the door to slam, but I wasn't about to find out. I didn't want to be anywhere near it. That night, I went home early, feeling shaken but not wanting to admit why. I had to face the fact that something strange was happening, but I wasn't ready to confront it. I told myself it was all in my head, that I was just tired and stressed from the long shifts. The following week, the hospital's administrator asked me to clean the East Wing again. It was a late request, and I was hesitant, but it was part of the job. I tried to avoid it for as long as I could, but eventually I had to go. I grabbed my cleaning supplies and headed to the hallway that led to the wing. The air was thick with dust, and the walls seemed to groan as I walked down the long corridor. It felt colder, almost unnaturally so. I switched on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness, and I started to clean the floors. That's when I saw her. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but no. There, at the far end of the hallway, was a woman. She was standing perfectly still, her long, dark hair hanging over her face, her hands by her sides. I couldn't move. My breath caught in my throat. She didn't move either. We just stared at each other. There was no sound, just the eerie silence of the hallway. I finally forced myself to speak, my voice shaky. Who are you? She didn't answer. She didn't even move. But slowly she began to raise her head. Her face was pale, her eyes dark and hollow, and there was something wrong with her expression. She wasn't looking at me with anger or malice, but with an intense, desperate longing. And then she spoke. "Help me." The words were low, like a whisper carried by the wind. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest, but I couldn't take my eyes off of her. I didn't know what to do. My body felt frozen in place. Suddenly she started to move toward me, not walking, but gliding slowly like she was floating. I couldn't breathe. I turned and ran as fast as I could down the hallway, not daring to look back. My mind was racing, but all I could think about was getting out of that wing. I didn't stop running until I reached the front entrance. The next day, I didn't show up for my shift. I couldn't go back. I was terrified. The whispers, the footsteps, the woman, they all felt so real and yet so impossible. I called in sick, but part of me knew I couldn't face it again. I didn't want to know what it all meant. Months passed, and I tried to forget what had happened. I moved to another town and started a new job, but the memories of St. Agatha's never left me. Every now and then I would wake up in the middle of the night, gasping for air, hearing whispers in the dark. I don't know what happened in that hospital, what caused the strange occurrences. Maybe it was the spirit of the woman who had died there. Maybe it was something else, something darker. I never got an answer, and I'm not sure I want one. Some things are better left in the past, even if they follow you into the future. Story the end.
Story number 6.
I used to work night shifts at a hospital in Pennsylvania just outside Scranton. It was one of those older places, the kind with creaky floors and long, dimly lit hallways that always smelled faintly of antiseptic and old metal. The hospital had been around since the early 1900s, with most of the original structure still intact. They'd modernized the equipment, sure, and the patient rooms were decent, but the bones of the building were ancient. My shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 5 nights a week, and most of the time it was uneventful, just paperwork, checking vitals, maybe an emergency or two, but nothing out of the ordinary. That changed the night I started covering the old North Wing. The North Wing hadn't been used for patients in years. It was mostly storage now, old gurneys, broken wheelchairs, outdated machines gathering dust. The upper administration said the layout didn't meet modern safety codes, and rather than spend the money to renovate, they just shuttered it off. But we still had to check it once a night as part of security protocol. Usually the guards handled that, but for a couple of weeks we were short-staffed, and our manager decided nurses on the night shift would rotate doing the walkthroughs. I got assigned to that duty for 3 nights in a row. The first night, I was just annoyed. It was cold, dark, and felt like a waste of time. I took my flashlight, walked the long corridor, glanced into each dusty room, then signed the check-in sheet at the far end. Each room looked the same, peeling wallpaper, rusted equipment, and silence that felt too thick. Still, nothing happened. The second night, it felt different. I stepped through the double doors into the wing around 3 a.m., the hospital behind me buzzing quietly with machines and murmurs. But once I crossed into that wing, it was like entering a different world. The temperature dropped noticeably. I could see my breath puff out in front of me, even though it was early spring and the heaters should have been running. I started down the hallway, flashlight beams slicing through the darkness. The doors were all closed, but the moment I reached the third room on the left, room 313, I thought I heard something. A faint shuffle, like feet dragging across tile. I stopped, heart pounding, and aimed the light toward the door. The handle was still. I stepped closer, leaned in to listen, and heard what sounded like a low, raspy breath just on the other side of the door. I opened it. The room was empty, but the smell hit me like a punch in the face. Rot, like something dead had been sitting there for days. I covered my nose with my sleeve, trying not to gag. The beam of light revealed a broken bed frame, tangled tubes, and a crumpled hospital gown in the corner. But nothing living. No people. No rats. I stepped back, pulled the door shut and moved faster through the rest of the wing. I signed the log at the end and practically jogged back to the main floor. I didn't say anything to anyone. What was I going to say? That I smelled something weird and maybe heard breathing? I'd sound paranoid or tired, and maybe I was just that. But the third night was when I knew it wasn't my imagination. It was close to 2:45 a.m. when I entered the wing. I'd waited longer than usual, stalling by organizing the med room and checking vitals I'd already checked earlier. I didn't want to go back in there, but I had to. I clicked on my flashlight and stepped into the darkness. This time, the doors weren't all closed. Room 313's door was slightly ajar. I was sure I'd left it shut the night before. I walked slowly, gripping the flashlight tight enough that my knuckles went white. I told myself to just go, sign the sheet, and get out. But when I passed by room 313, the light flickered. Not the flashlight, the overhead emergency lights, which were barely functional to begin with. They blinked for a few seconds, casting strange shadows down the corridor. And in that moment, I saw someone inside room 313. Just a glimpse, a figure standing near the bed. I backed up fast and aimed the flashlight inside. Nothing. I stood frozen for several seconds, the beam sweeping across the room. Still empty. But again, the smell returned, stronger this time, almost acidic. I heard the breath again, not through the door now. Right behind me. I spun around. No one was there. My heart was slamming in my chest, and my hands were shaking so badly the flashlight jittered in my grip. I forced myself down the hallway, past the rest of the rooms, until I reached the log sheet. I signed it with trembling hands and turned back. Halfway down the hall, I stopped. Room 313's door was now wide open. I hadn't heard it open, hadn't seen it move, but it was completely ajar, like someone had flung it open and was waiting just inside. I couldn't see much, just the edge of the bed frame and the dark, gaping interior. That night, I didn't go back to the nurse's station. I went straight to the security office. I told them someone was in the north wing. A trespasser, maybe a vagrant. I didn't mention the breathing, or the smell, or the figure I thought I saw, just that the door had been open and I'd heard movement. They sent 2 guards to check it out. I followed behind them, mostly because I didn't want to be alone. The 3 of us walked that wing from end to end. Every room was empty. Every door shut. No smell, no cold breath in the air, just silence. One of the guards gave me a strange look and asked if I'd gotten enough sleep. I didn't volunteer for North Wing duty after that. I swapped shifts with a coworker and avoided that part of the hospital entirely. But a week later, we heard that one of the guards had quit. No notice. Just didn't show up for work. The other one, Jason, stuck around, but he was different after that. Jumpy. Quiet. Wouldn't go near the north wing anymore either. Curiosity got the better of me eventually, and I caught him during a break, smoking outside near the loading dock. I asked him if anything weird had happened that night when we checked the wing together. He hesitated, then said, "You didn't smell anything that night?" "I did the night before, like something dead," I told him. He looked at the ground, then back at me. I smelled it too. But it wasn't just that. When we were walking past 313, I saw a woman standing in there. Just for a second. She was tall, long dark hair, hospital gown. Face was wrong though, like twisted. Mouth too wide. I didn't say anything because I thought I was seeing things. But then later I saw her again, in the mirror in the security office, just standing behind me. I didn't know what to say. It felt like confirmation, but also like stepping into a deeper level of something I didn't want to understand. After that conversation, I did some digging, asked some of the older nurses who'd worked there longer. One of them, Lorraine, used to cover the North Wing before it closed down. She was in her 60s, close to retirement, and didn't mind talking if you caught her in the right mood. I asked her about room 313. She went quiet. Her face went pale. Then she said, "That's the room Evelyn died in, back in the 80s. Young woman. Came in after a car crash. Broken pelvis, broken ribs, head trauma. She was in so much pain they put her on heavy meds. But one night they left her too long. Something went wrong. They found her in the morning. She'd pulled out her IV, got out of bed, and bled out trying to make it to the door. I asked if that was common. Not like that, she said. There was blood smeared all over the walls, like she was trying to write something. I asked if they ever figured out what she was writing. She just shook her head. It was one word over and over: cold. That's all. Just cold. After that, I couldn't stop thinking about Evelyn. I imagined her dragging herself across the floor in pain, confused, dying slowly in that dark room. And now, stuck there. I tried to forget it, to focus on work. But a few nights later, I was doing inventory in the supply closet near the nurse's break room. It was around 4 a.m., quiet. Most of the floor was asleep. I had the cabinet open, writing down gauze counts when I felt something move behind me. Just a shift in the air. Cold. And then I saw it. A reflection in the glass of the cabinet door, a woman, standing directly behind me. I spun, but no one was there. The hallway behind me was empty. I checked every room, no sign of anyone. I went home after that shift and barely slept. I called out sick the next night. When I came back, I learned that Jason, the guard who told me about the mirror, was gone. Not just quit, gone. Didn't show up. Didn't answer his phone. Apartment was empty when his landlord checked. They filed a missing persons report. It's been 6 months since then. I've transferred to a different department, day shifts, different floor, but sometimes I still hear things, like faint footsteps echoing down the stairwell when no one's there, or static on the intercom when it should be silent. One night I found a sticky note on my locker. No one admitted to putting it there. It just said in shaky handwriting, "She's still cold." Story the end.
Story number 7.
I had been working the night shift at a local hospital for about 4 months when I started noticing things. It was a small community hospital in the suburbs of Philadelphia. Nothing special about it, really. It wasn't a trauma center or anything fancy. The kind of place where people go for checkups or to get stitches. Quiet. Slow. And by slow, I mean most of the time, the halls were eerily empty. I had taken the job to pay the bills, really. I was a nursing student, and I had to work nights to make enough money while going to school during the day. At first, the job was exactly what I expected. Long, uneventful hours sitting in the nurse's station doing paperwork, answering calls, and occasionally checking on patients. There were usually a few nurses and a few patients around during the night, but for the most part, the hospital felt like a ghost town once midnight hit. I'd sit in my little office, monitor the cameras, and keep an eye on the hallway from the nurse's station. I'd go on my rounds every few hours to check on patients, but other than that, my nights were spent mostly in solitude. The isolation, I thought, was a small price to pay for decent pay and flexible hours. But then, the odd things started happening. It wasn't much at first. Small things, really. The kind of thing that could be easily brushed off as your mind playing tricks on you, especially when you're sleep-deprived and running on caffeine. One night, I remember walking past room 309, a room that had been empty for a while, and I swore I heard a soft whispering coming from inside. I paused, listening, but the hallway was still, silent. I figured maybe it was just the ventilation system or some noise from the other side of the building. Still, something about it felt off. A few days later, I was sitting at the nurse's station, flipping through some patient charts, when the overhead lights above me flickered. It wasn't the usual flicker that happens when a bulb is about to go out. This one was rhythmic, almost like someone was playing with the switch. I looked up, but the hallway was as quiet as ever. I got up to check the circuit breaker in the basement, thinking maybe something was wrong with the wiring. But when I got to the basement, the lights there were fine and the breaker was intact. The flickering continued for the rest of the night, though, always right above me, as if something or someone was trying to get my attention. It wasn't until one night that I was stationed in the emergency room that things really began to escalate. It was around 2:30 a.m., and the ER was relatively quiet, with only a handful of patients waiting to be seen. The nurses were all busy, and I was sitting at the station, going over some charts when I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps coming from the back hallway. I looked up, expecting to see one of the nurses or a doctor coming through, but there was no one. The footsteps grew louder, and then the sound of something scraping against the floor. I could almost feel the pressure building in the air, like static electricity. I stood up, walked down the hallway, and peeked around the corner. No one. The hallway was completely empty. Must be my imagination, I muttered to myself. But then the lights flickered again, this time all down the hallway, not just the nurse's station. and then the door to room 307, which had been closed all night, creaked open. Slowly. There was no one in the room. The bed was empty, and the lights inside were off. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I quickly walked over, shutting the door behind me. I told myself it was probably just an old door mechanism acting up. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The worst part, though, came about 2 weeks after that. It was a Wednesday night, and I was doing my usual rounds. The hospital was quiet, and I had just finished checking on the patients in the West Wing. I was walking back down the main corridor when I heard the sound of a door slamming open. I froze. It came from the East Wing, room 313, to be specific. That room had been empty for as long as I could remember. I slowly walked toward it, my heart pounding in my chest. The door was wide open, and the lights inside were flickering violently. There was no sound now, just a sudden, deep silence. I stepped inside. The room was cold, colder than the rest of the building, and the air smelled faintly of something like mildew. The bed was still made, but there was something about the room that made my skin crawl. A chill ran down my spine, and I had the distinct feeling that I wasn't alone. I turned quickly, but no one was there, just the usual medical equipment, the empty bed, and the flickering light. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That's when I saw it, a shadow moving in the corner of the room. It wasn't just a normal shadow like from the light overhead. No, this one moved independently, like it had a life of its own. It was too dark, too thick, and it wasn't just a shadow, it was watching me. I blinked, and it disappeared, but the coldness stayed. I backed out of the room quickly, my hands trembling. I didn't know what to think. I couldn't explain what had happened. Was I imagining things, or was there something more sinister at work? Over the next few days, things got worse. Every time I walked past room 313, I felt that same cold chill, that sense of being watched. The flickering lights continued too. I even started hearing whispers. Soft, unintelligible whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. Sometimes I'd hear my name being called out in the dead of night, but when I'd turn around, no one was there. I started doing some research about the hospital, trying to find any history that could explain what was going on. What I found shocked me. A few years before I started working there, a patient had died in room 313. The story was that he had been a middle-aged man with no family, and he'd been admitted for a routine procedure. But after the surgery, he started acting strangely. He'd complain of hearing voices at night, and the staff had found him pacing the hallways, talking to himself in a way that didn't make sense. A few weeks later, he passed away, suddenly, and under mysterious circumstances. There had been an investigation, but nothing conclusive was ever found. The staff thought it was just a case of post-surgical complications. But now, with everything I'd been experiencing, I couldn't shake the feeling that something more had happened in that room, something that had left a mark, something that hadn't gone away. One night, after a particularly long shift, I decided to confront my fears. I took a flashlight, grabbed my keys, and made my way back to room 313. The hallways were silent, the usual hum of the building systems eerily absent. As I approached the door, I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I opened the door slowly. The room was as I'd left it, cold, still, empty. But this time there was something different. On the floor near the bed, there was a trail of what looked like wet footprints. I bent down to examine them, but before I could get a good look, the door slammed shut behind me. I jumped, my heart racing. I tried to open the door, but it was locked. I was trapped. The lights flickered again, and then, from the corner of the room, I heard a voice, deep, raspy, and unmistakably male. "You shouldn't have come back." I spun around, but no one was there. The temperature dropped drastically. I could see my breath fog in the air as the voice grew louder, now joined by others, whispers, soft and urgent, calling out to me from all directions. I ran to the window, but it was sealed shut. I turned back to the door, desperate, and pounded on it with all my strength. Then, as if by some miracle, it opened. I stumbled out into the hallway, gasping for air. I never went back to room 313 after that. After that night, I couldn't continue working at the hospital. I handed in my resignation and left the job a week later. It wasn't just the terrifying experiences I had endured. It was the feeling of being watched, of something lingering, waiting in the shadows. The whispers didn't stop either. They followed me. Sometimes I'd hear them late at night, calling my name. To this day, I still can't explain what happened in that hospital or what I experienced in room 313. But whatever it was real. I just wish I had known sooner what I was getting myself into. Story, the end.